The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Week 11 DraftKings picks and preview. If you want to play in the best tournament on DraftKings, boy, do I have a deal for you. If you hit the podcast description or video description, you will find the link to the Pat Mayo Experience DraftKings Open. $15 to play, 3 max entry, no rake, $45,000 of guaranteed money. And the best part, a min cash, double your money. It legit is the best tournament on DraftKings. Everyone should go play in that right now. Get in before it fills up because it tends to fill up rather quickly. And if you want to get into a draw for 20 DK dollars, again, very easy to do so. Smash the like button for this episode. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and tell me your favorite running back below $5,000 on the main slate whose name isn't Brian Hill. I'm very curious to see where, after we have the chalky Brian Hill, where does everyone else go in the $4,000 range if they're going to pay down? Do you pay down? Do you pivot onto someone else? Do you eat the chalk? I'm curious to see what everyone out there is going to do. The other way to get into the draw is subscribe and download the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you download your podcast. Then rate it 5 stars, DraftKings handle, and something you like about the show, something positive. I want to read some positive comments, okay? And then you'll be in a draw for 20 DK bucks. I'll be live on Sunday morning going over all of the injuries and all of the new start sits, taking your viewer questions, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. And then again, live 1 p.m. Eastern time on the DraftKings YouTube channel on Monday when I announce these winners and recap the week. Joining me now to break down every game on the 11-game main slate for Week 11 from FantasyGuru.com, from EliteFantasy.com. I got him because we have the same haircut. It is Vlad Sedler. What's going on, my man?
Hey, what's going on, Patrick? Always a pleasure to be on with you. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, tell everyone how you're doing in these high-stakes fantasy leagues. I'm always, as I do not play in any season-long high-stakes leagues because, you know, I don't feel like it, to tell you the truth. But you're exceptionally good at them, so tell everyone what you've been doing so far this year.
Well, you know, as it always is the case, and it really just depends on the season. Like, you know, last year drafted Le'Veon Bell and Leonard Fournette in the first round, so I kind of got what I deserved. This year, hit on Dalvin Cook, who was my main target in all 3 of my my primetime drafts over in the high stakes format in the first round. Got all the Lamar Jackson that I can handle pretty much in the 10th round, wherever I could. And then a little special of the New England Patriots for the most part in the 18th, 19th round, simply because their week 2 through 9 schedule was too good to be true. And it ended up being better than good to be true.
All right, well, hopefully you can have the same success of picks for Week 11 on the DraftKings slate as we go over the first look at this. And we'll start at running back. It's just Christian McCaffrey. He is the number 1 running back in fantasy. He's the number 1 priced running back on this slate. Again, this week he is $11,500. He actually probably has a better matchup in Week 11 against Atlanta. But is it a week where you pay up for McCaffrey? Because that seems to continuously work every single week. Even in the Pat Mayo Experience Open last week, the winner didn't have Christian McCaffrey, but the guy in second had Christian McCaffrey. And because of Brian Hill this week opening up the bottom at running back, you can get him in and still like your lineup a lot. Would you pay for Christian McCaffrey on DraftKings?
It's a tough call. I mean, I think you need to consider him. He's in the conversation. He's near the top of the conversation every single week. The price is up there at 10,500. We're talking, you know, levels that, you know, Gurley from a couple of years ago, the Le'Veon Bells of 3 years ago. And that's because he's averaging 30 plus DraftKings points per game. You take away those 2 games from Tampa Bay. Of course, you don't take them away, but were you to do so, I mean, his numbers are of epic proportion. He's scoring touchdowns every day. He's approaching that LaDainian Tomlinson type fantasy season where you might see near 500 total fantasy points. And game flow should work well for him. The thing is, there are a couple of gentlemen just a tick below him, actually quite a tick below him in the 8,900, 9,000 range, who I think might be more tempting. And so I personally am going to be, kind of biting my tongue and jumping down to the next level down of running back.
All right, so the next level down is Elliott and Delvin Cook at 9 and 8,900. After that, it's Fournette, Kamara, Le'Veon Bell, Josh Jacobs, Mark Ingram, Marlon Mack, Latavius Murray, Tevin Coleman, and Devin Singletary. That is your $6,000 to $9,000 range. And you kind of alluded to that next level down. Although Tevin Coleman at home against Arizona, if there is no Matt Breida, which it is shaping up to be that way right now, kind of tempting. I'm not going to lie to you, especially because he burned so many people in the showdown slate 2 weeks ago at Arizona that people might not want to go back to him.
Yeah, and recency bias always needs to be thrown out the window. Breida is not looking good, not looking healthy. Even if he plays, I would imagine that number of snaps or carries that he sees in week 11 is going to be minimal. Might mean a little bit of Raheem Mostert coming in and doing a little change of pace, but Tevin Coleman is in a smash matchup. I think it's a fantastic price. You're going to see his ownership start to tick up as we get closer to the weekend. A matchup with Arizona is always beautiful, and with that game being a 13-point spread in favor of San Francisco, absolutely excellent game flow. Have to love Tevin Coleman at the very, very affordable price.
So between Coleman and then all the way up to Zeke, who is at Detroit at the $9,000 level, I'm going to guess you like Delvin Cook.
Yeah, I mean, this man, I think outside of just a couple of games, has at least one touchdown in every game, and obviously I have to separate the personal, but he's averaging just on the ground 99 yards a game. He's an absolute beast, and this matchup is fantastic for him. Game flow should work very well here as well against the Broncos with Minnesota back at home, favored coming off that game with Dallas. It's a fantastic spot for him. I'm very, very high on Dalvin Cook this week at home.
What do we do with the Saints running backs? They're going to be favored on the road. However, Tampa Bay, the best run defense in the league, is that something that you can look at Alvin Kamara and say, well, he didn't quite perform up to regular Kamara levels last week. Maybe people will get off of him because of both that and they see this matchup. But this is a spot where, again, he can just pile up like double-digit catches through the air and beat them that way.
The price is really nice. That's the thing. I mean, 7,400. It's a very un-Kamara-esque price tag, and that's of course because he did miss weeks 7 through 9 there. But I'm always careful with playing any running backs against Tampa. We saw it again last week, and the fact that Latavius Murray did have that incredible stretch. He was essentially the number 2 running back in fantasy for the 3-week stretch that Kamara was gone. He's going to soak up some of the carries. He's going to be potentially a goal line hog. He could potentially siphon a couple of touchdowns there if they do get to the goal line. And really the way to beat, to really for Breeze to move the ball is going to be to pass it. Kamara is going to be involved in that. He's going to probably catch 5 to 7 balls. I just don't know if the upside is there with Latavius Murray still in the mix and probably mixing in around 30-40% of snaps.
So the other guys that are going to come up into the situation, Fournette, who's slightly more expensive than Kamara. I have a feeling that Josh Jacobs at home against Cincinnati as 10-point favorites. Going to be a pretty popular play. I'm not going to lie to you, Vlad. So if we're constructing our teams here, and we're talking tournaments here, we're not talking cash games. Cash games, you can go somewhere else, get some cash game advice. Losing picks for tournaments, what you get on the Pat Mayo experience. So would you be good with fading Jacobs, or do you think that he's a must? Because obviously you can't just take everyone from the very top of the pricing. And if you take McCaffrey, it's going to be very difficult to jam one of these guys in whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, this week it really comes down to roster construction and what you're planning to do at quarterback and receiver. I mean, there are a ton of fantastic quarterback options. Receiver is just, foaming at the mouth of options. And that's the case with running back as well. Josh Jacobs is a little bit on the higher end of the spectrum of what we've seen for his price points, but he's having a fantastic rookie year. He's settled in there at a very nice 6,900, averaging 90 yards on the ground himself, is the red zone guy unequivocally. And the matchup is fantastic. I mean, Cincinnati, there's no team allowing more rushing yards per game than the Bengals. In fact, they're allowing 25 more yards on the ground than the next worst team. You're going to see some chalk probably on Derek Carr, the quarterback, but I really feel that it's a Josh Jacobs game. So it really comes down to lineup construction, because there are a couple of guys, and even one in Devin Singletary, who we haven't mentioned, who is also in a fantastic spot.
I worry about Devin Singletary, and I kind of keep bringing this up every single week, that it's tough to get to him solely because he is at such high risk, maybe more than any other running back in football, of getting his touchdowns vultured at the goal line. Not only by Frank Gore, who continues to get run inside the red zone, but Josh Allen has the most rushing touchdowns on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always the case. Devin Singletary has looked fantastic his rookie year. Just, a couple weeks ago, we saw what he's capable of with a full workload, had 20 carries, ran for almost 100 yards, got in the end zone and caught a few balls for 45 yards as well. Last game was not so pretty against Cleveland, and that's with a little bit of a higher ownership. You're right, Gore and Josh Allen always do pose a bit of a threat, but this just feels like a great spot for him. That is a very high pressure spot for him to really get some work, see 15 carries or so, and maybe take a couple in from midfield. I think that's really possible where he doesn't even have to get the goal line carries. I think this defense of Miami is so porous that it allows an opportunity for Big Devin to get in the box from middle of the field a couple times.
Well, that's actually a really good point, that if he's going to score his touchdowns, he's going to score them from deep. So if you do take him, you get that upside baked in, but there's relatively no floor. Like, I know a lot of people, I just said we're not talking about cash games, but as a cash game running back, that would worry me the most about him, is that he could go out and score 4 points for you and have really no recourse. But the upside is so high, and coming off a week where he did let a lot of people down at inflated ownership, this might be a really nice spot to go back to him. If we just go below the $6,000 range, we'll have a whole segment here on Brian Hill in just a moment. But I really like Joe Mixon, especially if Gio Bernard in this knee sprain isn't able to go at Oakland. They just showed a willingness to run the ball with Mixon 30 times, despite being down 30 points in that game against Baltimore. I think this game is going to be a little bit closer in Oakland, but if he is the only guy in that Cincinnati backfield, just through attrition alone, he should be able to muster himself to 20 points just on volume. All of a sudden, he sneaks into the end zone, and you're having a good week with Joe Mixon.
Yeah, it's this is a guy that is essentially the biggest bust of the early rounds of season-long leagues. And really, it's not his fault. I mean, he's a very talented guy, fantastic runner. He's just running behind the worst offensive line in football, and just the team is just an absolute train wreck. But we see what happens when he does get a lot of work. Obviously, we saw 30 carries last week against Baltimore. Wasn't necessarily all that efficient, under 4 yards to carry, but did get over 100. And all of this, he ended up dropping 20 DraftKings points without even getting into the end zone. So. Oakland does have somewhat of a stout run defense. That doesn't really matter here. I mean, especially with no Gio Bernard, if he does end up not playing, you're going to just see a lot of short passes to Mixon, a lot of short passes to Tyler Boyd, get some Audit Tate in the mix. If you think Cincinnati keeps it any somewhat close or keeps this game respectable, then you have to consider Joe Mixon.
Brian Hill is $4,800. So between Mixon and Hill, is there any running back that you think you would consider into your player pool mix? Because for me, whether it's Kenyon Drake or Ronald Jones or Phillip Lindsay, I just think the cheaper options are probably a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy that sticks out to me is Kenyon Drake, and it's not an ideal matchup. Obviously, San Francisco has the best run defense in the game, but Kenyon Drake, as we saw, is going to be utilized a lot as a pass catcher. He fits this offense well of Cliff Kingsbury's fantastically. And we saw what's up with David Johnson. I mean, the guy does not look healthy. He does not look like he's going to get many carries this week. And with Chase Edmonds not coming back, I'm seeing a lot of work for Kenyon Drake, sort of a 5%, super sneaky GPP pivot off some of the guys in this range.
So let's talk about this now then. So the big pickup on the waiver wire of the week was Brian Hill, unless your waivers haven't passed yet, but still. Brian Hill and the upper $4,000 area, as you alluded to at the very beginning of the show, is going to be the mega chalk of the week at Carolina. But here's the problem. Brian Hill, is he good? Is he bad? Who knows? But running backs in the Atlanta offense so far this season really haven't done much. It is an ideal matchup on the ground against Carolina, as they're much more susceptible to being gashed by the run than they are through the air, especially if Bradbury returns this week. But it's a game flow that looks like it's going to to be a lot of passing for Atlanta, like most of their games, unless anyone is buying what they did a week ago as something that's sustainable. I don't really believe that. Just seems sort of like a peak Super Bowl-esque game for them. Not them in the Super Bowl, but their Super Bowl for this season. Come out, beat a division rival in the Saints. Maybe they can pay it forward and keep this momentum going. I don't think that's going to happen. So Brian Hill, to me, is not a safe play like Jalen Samuels was 2 weeks ago. I think he falls more into that Ty Johnson bucket from 3 weeks ago when everyone was super pumped up about him. And I think that there is a breaking point for his ownership. I don't think that he is a free square. I don't think that you have to have him in your lineups. And if he's going to be like 25% owned, potentially even more, I think he's a full fade. Then you can start looking to some of these other options who are basically equivalent. Maybe not in the full smash spot that it appears to be, but Jordan Howard against the Patriots at $4,700, I think is in a really nice spot. Carlos Hyde can steal some touchdowns. J.D. McKissick would have been this guy if Brian Hill hadn't emerged because of this Freeman injury, because of this Ty Johnson injury. You might see like 65%, 75% run from McKissick this week at $4,600, and I bet you he catches more passes than Brian Hill does.
Oh, for sure he's going to catch more passes. I'm personally am in the same boat with you. I am a little concerned. I think people might be a little bit enamored with the fact that Carolina is the dead last team in the game against the run, ranked 32nd in DVOA run defense, and also give up a boatload more touchdowns than any other team on the ground, 17 to be exact. I myself actually dropped Brian Hill on my 2 primetime teams last week. So that one's killing me. I could really actually use him this week. So, but that's not a reason that I don't think he doesn't do well. I just, I think it's a good game flow scenario for Carolina where they're going to run the ball down the throats with McCaffrey. A lot of passes. I like the Carolina side of the ball. And so game script wise, I don't necessarily know if he's going to get a lot of carries. I think you're going to see Matt Ryan chasing from behind. And I don't know if that involves a lot of passes to Brian Hill. Sure, he might catch 3 or 4. But as you alluded to, I think there are guys in this range like a J.D. McKissick who I think will catch more passes and probably offer more value on a full PPR side.
Yeah, despite the terrible run defense of the Carolina Panthers, per DVOA, the Falcons are only 25th in rushing offense. And then you're going to need Brian Hill to stay in the game if they are behind and catch a lot of these passes. And he caught a few last week, but this could be a situation where they now know that they don't have Devonta Freeman, that all of a sudden Kenyon Barner is the pass-catching back, and all of a sudden you're sitting there being like, why isn't Brian Hill on the field? I have him in every lineup. This isn't good.
Yeah, this is your warning, my friends.
So who would be the guy? Is it McKissick below? Because, you could go down to, I don't want to use Kalen Ballage, but he's going to get like 25 touches against the Bills, who are also not great against the run, but he's also not good, so don't use him. But you could even keep going down. Like if Will Fuller is out again and you get into a situation where Kiki is still on the mend and he's not back in the good graces of Bill O'Brien, like Duke Johnson's a pretty good price in what could be a pass-happy script for the Texans.
Yeah, Duke Johnson. To be honest, I don't think people have to go under the 5,000 range. I think because there are so many good options this week, I think Coleman is priced cheap enough. Duke Johnson, as you mentioned, even Devin Singletary. I don't think there's a reason to have to force it. And we didn't even mention, the savings that you could have on McCaffrey down to Zeke Elliott with the Lions basically being an absolute crap show against opposing running backs. And Zeke has yet to have that true game. He has not topped 30 fantasy points this year. This feels like one of those spots, especially with game flow. I think we could see, 2 or 3 touchdowns out of him today. Get a little bit savings on McCaffrey and not force yourself to have to go under that. I personally do not want Kalen Ballage's 22 for 35 this week.
Yeah, but maybe this is a week where he goes into some sort of time warp and all of a sudden he's good.
It's true. It's this is the NFL. Anything can happen.
So if you weren't going to use Brian Hill, but you were stuck and you entered the viewer contest where you smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and tell me your favorite sub 5,000 running back who's not Brian Hill, my answer would actually be Jordan Howard against the Patriots.
Yeah, that's it's not a bad option because I don't think this game is going to be an absolute, necessarily a blowout for New England. If there are any goal line carries, it's going to be Jordan Howard there. Pretty much touchdowns in 5 of his last 7 games. always getting the goal line carries. So I'm not opposed to that option.
Yeah, and then McKissick I'll probably have in there too. And that's more or less if you want to get McCaffrey lineups in and you do want some savings at running back, these are the type of names that you can go to. And if Brian Hill is going to end up being pushing 20, 25, 30% ownership in some of these large contests, I just don't think that he's that good that you need to jump on the bandwagon like that. Put it this way, if Brian Hill was like 5% owned, I think that'd be a nice roll of the dice because you wouldn't need to have him in every single lineup. But at the ownership that he's projected to have right now, you probably do. Like if you play 10 lineups and you want to be overweight to the field on Brian Hill, you probably need like 6 or 7 lineups with Brian Hill. And that's just too much for me. Would it be? It's too much for you, right?
Oh, I'm seeing and assuming it's going to be 40+%. You're going to see over 60% in cash. I mean, I think that's just the way that things are going to go. People don't dig in and dive in as much as they should, and they're just going to look at how Carolina defends the run and not really think it through and just sort of take what they believe to be a free square. At 3,500, that's a whole different story, but that's not the price. I mean, Brian Hill is almost 5,000, where you can get Tevin Coleman for only 1,000 more. So for me, at this ownership, I'm with you. I'm not on board for it.
Yeah, you can just pay up for Joe Mixon in that spot or just pay down for, like I said, Jordan Howard or J.D. McKissick, probably equivalent options, potentially even higher upside, especially with Howard, because like you mentioned, he's going to get all of those goal line carries. Switch to receiver very quickly. Michael Thomas is the #1 guy in a fantastic matchup against the Tampa Bay Bucks, but he's super pricey. He's $9,900. So I think you're going to see very few teams with McCaffrey and Michael Thomas on it. He is $1,800 more than DeAndre Hopkins. Do you think that the overall player pool of DraftKings players this week on the main slate, do you think that they're more comfortable paying up for McCaffrey or Michael Thomas?
I think it's McCaffrey. I think, he's just a running back and receiver sort of all in one. And I think that's just the way that people are going to go this week. I think it just makes a lot more sense. A 9,000 Michael Thomas, that's a whole different story. But at nearly 10,000, it's going to keep his ownership somewhat down. I don't think you're going to see more than 10 to 15% on him, simply because it's going to be really tough to fit him in lineups. And obviously he's having a phenomenal season. He might even set the record for most, targets and receptions in the season. It's not out of the question at this point. And the matchup is beautiful too. I mean, Tampa Bay is an absolute sieve. Just the secondary is absolutely horrendous. Probably going to be a lot of Sean Murphy bunting in coverage there. It's going to be, quite a great scenario for him this week.
So do you think that you'll construct tournament lineups where Michael Thomas is your most expensive player, knowing that a lot of people will either pay down at running back to the Zeke, Dalvin Cook, or just merely pay up for Christian McCaffrey, meaning that you cannot afford him? Or do you think you can construct some lineups where you go McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, and a bunch of scrubs?
The latter I probably can't do or won't do. I'm going to have to make tough decisions, but that's the beauty of this, is there's so many guys in these ranges. Guys I like at different high price points that I'm not going to force it. In a 3 entry max scenario, I do like the idea of playing a Drew Brees, Mike Thomas team, just because this could be, the absolute ceiling spot for these two, especially coming off that embarrassing loss to the Falcons last week. Tampa Bay is horrendous, as we mentioned. One of the worst teams in the game against the pass. I feel a really big Brees bounce back spot. And I think Michael Thomas is going to be a really big part of that success.
So for me, when I'm thinking about wide receiver, when we look at all the high-priced options, DeAndre Hopkins is $8,100. Amari Cooper is next on that list at Detroit. Julian Edelman, Julio Jones, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. Emmanuel Sanders, no word yet on whether he's going to play or not, and we'll discuss the San Francisco receivers here in a second. Maybe that can open up some value. Then you have Diggs and Thielen. Thielen probably not going to play again. Galladay, Hilton, probably not going to play. Gallup, John Brown, DJ Chark, AJ Green, no word yet on whether he's playing or not. And then Cortland Sutton at $6,000. If you're going to start with receivers, I think I'm starting with Julio. The air yards have been there. The touchdowns have not been, but that's nothing new for Julio Jones. And if everyone is so enamored with Brian Hill in this game, call it a hunch, but doesn't this just reek of the Julio Jones 3-touchdown game?
Yeah, I mean, I played him that week. I think it was 3 years ago. Actually won a couple of big GPPs that week. Julio, week 3 or week 4, I believe, 200 plus yards, couple touchdowns. He had a 40, 45 point outing, an absolute monster. This does sort of reek of that similar situation. The only difference being the ownership. You're not going to get Julio under 10% in this one. It's going to be a scenario where he is going to be one of the most popular receivers on the board. And that's because people aren't going to be able to or want to get up there to Michael Thomas. And the price difference is huge. It's staggering, actually, if you think about it. Nearly 25% difference. 7,500 Julio is very tempting. I think you're going to see 20+% ownership on him. He's crushed Carolina before. They are beatable through the air, and it's Julio. He's truly matchup proof. If Ryan is locked in on him, he's catching his balls. I don't think anything's going to stop.
So of the plus $6,000 receivers, if you were constructing your teams, you're going to pay up for at least one of the running backs, maybe two. And let's say you can afford one of these guys. Who do you think is going to be your core expensive receiver this week?
For me, I think John Brown is somebody that I'm really interested in. He's just really, really consistent. He is the main target of Josh Allen. I think Miami keeps being at home. I think Miami at least puts up some points to keep this game somewhat respectable and not end up being a complete and utter blowout. And he's due for a touchdown. I mean, he's only got 2 on the year. He hasn't scored since week 7. 6,400 for John Brown is a really good price for a guy that saw 11 targets last week. That's really fast, has matchups against a secondary that is immensely burnable. So he's probably where I start the conversation. And then Mike Evans, to be honest, 7,400. I think he's got a good matchup as well. Lattimore is a little dinged up. The rest of those corners are not all that hot. New Orleans, Tampa Bay can end up being a shootout. It's one of only 3 games with a 50+ Vegas total. So those 2 guys are very intriguing.
What do you make of all these injured guys, whether it be Sanders, AJ Green, T.Y. Hilton? Let's say that last second one of these guys becomes active. We know that's usually a recipe for super low ownership. Would any of those guys intrigue you as an option if they were active?
It really depends on the type of injury. I think anything having to do with, lower leg, lower body injuries, I'm always going to be a little wary of these guys. Speedsters like T.Y. Hilton. The thing is, if they play, it obviously means that they feel that they're good enough and healthy enough to play. But Hilton is doubtful at this point. He's usually, when he's got a matchup at home and against Jacksonville, it ends up being a really good spot. But with him dealing with a calf injury, if I was to see that he was put into the lineup, I'd probably be a little wary. I'd probably start him in my season-long teams, but in DFS, I'd probably skip out.
The only one we didn't really mention, we did mention a bunch of people from the very top end, but like Hopkins against Baltimore could be a very soft spot as a sandwich pricing type guy. If everyone's going to use Julio or want to pay up to Michael Thomas, it could just leave Hopkins, Cooper, and especially Edelman with relatively 0 ownership. Edelman against Philly, I find super intriguing though, just because everyone kind of forgets that their pass defense is absolute trash, but they still bring the heat on the quarterback, which could mean a lot of quick, short passes, which is prime time for Edelman and prime time for Sanu, and maybe even James White, who we didn't really talk about under the Patriots. I don't hate a Patriot stack this week.
Yeah. So in my weekly quarterback column, I wrote up Tom Brady. He's somebody that has not been getting a lot of love in the DFS circle this season. It's because, he's just sort of game managing. And so this is a great scenario for Edelman. I do wish he was a little cheaper. I wish he was closer to, 69, 7,000, somewhere around there. But you're right. Philadelphia's run defense is fantastic. It's going to be tough for them. And I don't believe Bill Belichick's game plan is going to be like, hey, let's just run Sonny and Michelle down the middle and Rex Burkhead. They're going to be passing, like you mentioned. It's going to be those short hops, short passes to Edelman, James White. Get some of their other guys, Dorsett's in the mix. So that's the way that they're going to attack this time. Edelman could very well lead all receivers in receptions this weekend, and he's consistent, man. I mean, he's putting up 17, 27, 14, 23 every week. The man is putting up DraftKings points.
Last one in the $6,000 level at an even $6,000. It is Cortland Sutton against the Vikings, whose pass defense has looked horrendous over the past month. No one really wants to go to him because they don't love Brendan Allen, and who does? But if the entire offense is going to be, I'm going to throw every pass at Cortland Sutton, and then maybe mix it up with a few Noah Fants in there too. Why not take that chance? Like, I can't imagine a lot of people are lining up. Like, you mentioned John Brown in that range. DJ Chark has been a popular name. It just feels like Cortland Sutton's going to fly underneath the radar.
He absolutely is going to fly underneath the radar. And he's not somebody that I've used very often this year. And obviously that's been a mistake to some degree. And he's not a name that is going to be very sexy. People picking him off because nobody really loves to target Minnesota's secondary. But Xavier Rhodes has not been good at all this year. And that's probably the guy that Sutton's going to line up most with, PFF grade of around 50. Actually, one of the bottom third cornerbacks in the league this year, just as far as how he's been graded out. And so Sutton's going to be peppered with a lot of targets, and it's a good matchup. He's on my list. He's on the short list.
So for me, I think this $5,000 level of receiver is super intriguing, and it does open up a lot of opportunities in your lineup that you don't have to pay all the way down, but also you don't have to go all the way up. Cortland Sutton's one for me. I always like DJ Moore every single week, but yeah, he's a bit pricey. You can probably get away from him a little bit. People might go back to Zach Pascal, but then we start looking at these guys. Not sure if Will Fuller's going to play or not, but whatever. Scoring McLaurin against the Jets. $5,600. No one's going to use him because Haskins is playing quarterback, but I really don't care who's playing against this Jets defense. He is a big play guy. The air yards are there. He hasn't quite hit. He's had some really tough matchups over the past 5 weeks. This is not a tough matchup. I think that old Terry is going to get himself right in this game, and I want to be there to cash in on those points.
You're right. You're absolutely right. If there was ever a game to Dwayne Haskins for him to show that he is potentially the quarterback of the future, this is it. Terry McLaurin is going to be his go-to guy here. The matchups couldn't get any tougher than what we've seen at Buffalo, at Minnesota, against the Niners, in the constant sea change at quarterback. So it's been really tough for McLaurin to adjust. But we saw, I think we're all aware of his breakthrough speed. He's a good route runner. He's very mature for a rookie, and the price is fantastic. We saw what he's capable of earlier this season. If Daniel Jones and Jamison Crowder can do it, or I'm not Jamison Crowder, Darius Slayton, then anything can happen. Terry McLaurin, 5,600, a really good price, going to go under 10% on this week.
And he's $100 cheaper than Christian Kirk, who I assume a lot of people are going to funnel to coming off the huge week. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they think that he kind of blew his load last week and he's going to be fine here against San Francisco and not go back to him with a slight price adjustment on him. Not up all that much because of the tougher matchup. But Jamison Crowder, who you actually kind of hit on, is right there at Washington. He's been really good. And I know he's expensive, but he keeps finding his way into the end zone. And Vlad, it's a revenge game. You gotta write that narrative in.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I think there's a time and place for revenge. I think sometimes people use it like, oh, this guy played against, for this team 4 years ago. That's not revenge. It really depends on the scenario. But yeah, he did play for the Redskins for his career. They gave up on him, and here he is now with the Jets. He is the weekly slot corner du jour. You can always pop him in. He's not going to score a touchdown every week, but he's probably going to see at least 6 targets every week. And against the Jets in this matchup that has been serving up points to opposing slot receivers like hotcakes, it is a good matchup. And because there's, this is a game with a Vegas total under 40, it's not going to be a game that many people are going to attack. Guys like with McLaurin and Jamison Crowder are going to fall under the radar. And if you think about it, you saw what happened last week with the Giants-Jets game, winning all the tournaments. You could very well see it again here with the Redskins and the Jets, 2 teams with horrendous defenses that could give up a lot of fantasy points to the offense.
Anyone else in the 5K range do it for you, whether it be like Ridley, potentially Curtis Samuel, Tyler Boyd, who we hit on a couple times? Is Sanu the cheaper option to Julian Edelman here? And then we get into like the 4,000s with like Alshon, but that's a real tough matchup against the Patriots. But even Tyrell Williams, for that matter, who didn't score a touchdown last week, therefore he's no good anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Tyrell Williams is going to be very popular this week, at least as far as I see it, and that's because of Cincinnati. Cincinnati's bottom 3 against the run and the pass, which is hard to do. There are only a couple of teams. Basically bottom 5 against the run of the pass. Arizona is one of the other ones. But Tyrell Williams is going to be somewhat chalky because of the price and because he's been pretty consistent. Scored a touchdown every week until his last 2 games. Him and Carr are going to be a sexy pairing for people. I think some alternatives in this range include Curtis Samuel, really fast against a bottom three Atlanta secondary. They're actually ranked 31st against the pass. Tyler Boyd's going to see a lot of volume, only 5,200. This Raiders unit in the secondary is arguably the worst in the game, and they're good against the run. So you're going to see a lot of passes. So Tyler Boyd is interesting. And finally, Calvin Ridley. In this game, with so many people on Julio, you get a little bit of a savings. There's no Hooper, there's no Freeman, so it's going to be a lot of pass funnels to Julio and Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is nice and cheap.
That's actually a really interesting idea too. Like you mentioned, if Julio is going to be super chalky at the very top, you want exposure to this passing game. I kind of like Russell Gage just because he's so cheap, but you probably don't need to go down that low. But he's going to man the seams where Austin Hooper is out. I doubt we're going to see a ton from Luke Stalker. But Ridley is super interesting here. That he'll probably end up with like 4 or 5% ownership unless people really go all in on the stack. I'm good with fading Tyrell Williams here, but again, now we've built a lineup where if your first two receivers are McLaurin and Calvin Ridley, you can do an awful lot with that team and not feel bad about it either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing is this week, it feels like, as opposed to last week where things were very concentrated, at least for me when I was making teams and builds, it really made a lot of sense where to go. This week, there's just so many options at all the positions. I think it's tough. You can go any which way. And yes, I think that does involve potentially finding three guys who could be, three of the top 7 scoring receivers and finding them in the middle range. So a lot of these guys that we're mentioning, they could go, 5 for 100 with a touchdown very easily.
Sub $5,000 levels, just kind of giving it a quick peek. Didi's back from injury. Do we just fire up some Didi?
You can always fire up a little Didi. It's always a little worrisome because, there's a lot of new things going on here. You've got Nick Foles back in the mix. You've got the fact that DJ Shark and Chris Conley are good. You've got Fournette probably getting a lot of the volume. So it's tough to say. If he's healthy and he's back, which appears like he is, I think Didi is somebody that's, at least in the very, very least in the conversation.
And then we have to start talking about Foles as well. Like, yes, he's going to be healthy. Of course, he's playing, but is he going to be any good in his first game back? I don't know. Of the low 4,000s, Auden Tate is the one that really stuck out to me. I could see myself not playing Boyd, but playing Tate if AJ Green sits again.
Yeah, in fact, Auden Tate's got one of the best matchups, just as far as straight up against opposing corners. Probably going to be in the coverage of of Trayvon Mullen, who is basically given up, I think, almost 2.5 yards per route created, giving up just a ton of fantasy points to opposing receivers. Auden Tate's got the height and weight advantage on him by about 30 pounds, 3 inches. So the matchup is good, and it's about time we get some Auden Tate back into our lives.
So like I mentioned, Russell Gage, $3,300. I prefer him over any of like the punt running back plays if you wanted to go down. And that's really a way to open up all of your salary if you want it. But is this a week to take a shot on Andy Isabella? The snaps are up. He's getting these opportunities, and with him, it legit takes one play for him to break the slate.
Yeah, I was gonna, Twitter's a funny place, but I was last night. I just got distracted, so I couldn't finish the tweet. But I was gonna say, man, isn't it possible that Andy Isabella would be leading all wide receivers in fantasy scoring had he just played every game and got 70% of the snaps? Like, dude is, and obviously I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but he's a beast, man. Just let the guy play. I actually popped him in some lineups last week, and hey, I got lucky. It worked out. At least got some points out of him. But let the man play. Free him. He's, he's made for the league, for the NFL. I'm not worried about the fact that it's San Francisco. They've hit a bunch of injuries, and so good spot. Let's play some Isabella.
Quarterbacks. Is there any particular games that we should think about stacking right off the hop? I'm looking at the over-unders right now when it comes to which games are probably going to be the most popular. Saints and Buccaneers. That's going to be a popular one, as is Texans and Ravens when you have Watson and Lamar both in the same game. Falcons and Panthers, 49.5 game total with that. And then Bengals and Raiders. Raiders have the highest implied team total of the week, just below 30. I don't know if I necessarily buy that, to tell you the complete truth. They play to their opponent a lot, and they play to the score a lot, which might limit Derek Carr. I think just off the hop, I think I'm good with playing 0% Derek Carr this week.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Quarterback is absolutely loaded as far as games that we can attack. I think there are 3 games that have Vegas totals over 50 that people are going to be going towards. The tough one is Houston Baltimore because it's not the ideal matchup for Deshaun Watson against this Baltimore defense on the road. And he's expensive. And the thing with Lamar Jackson, though the matchup is beautiful, it's fantastic. Houston secondary is absolutely horrendous. He's expensive. I mean, he's really getting up there. If you're thinking about playing McCaffrey or Cook or Elliott and a Julio, and this and that, it's going to be really tough to get there with Lamar Jackson. That leaves us with obviously New Orleans and Tampa Bay. And then, of course, Atlanta, Carolina. You'll probably see some Matt Ryan love, but I actually really like Kyle Allen. He's dirt cheap. He's right around a little over 5,000, if I'm not mistaken. And the matchup is perfect, and his targets are fantastic. Greg Olsen as a tight end, against Atlanta, serving up fantasy points to opposing tight ends, and then Samuel and Moore. That combination is just phenomenal. So really like Kyle Allen as a sneaky cheap guy for just 5,300.
So if I'm going to go down low, I think I might use Jeff Driscoll. I think Jeff Driscoll and his rushing ability, if he starts against the Cowboys, I know the Cowboys are likely to put up points. You think it comes through Zeke? I can see that happening this week too, and maybe Dak gets limited a little bit that you don't have to have him. But just even watching him against the Bears in the second half, he's basically in YOLO mode. He's like, I'm going to take off and run, or I'm just going to bomb it down the field to Kenny Golladay. And that is, I mean, you probably don't need to play him with Golladay. It probably makes a bit more sense to do so, but he's $4,600. Like if you actually wanted to play a McCaffrey and Michael Thomas lineup, these are the type of guys that you need to look at.
Yeah, that's really kind of the only way to do it. I mean, when you start talking about guys under the 5,000 range and they're actually legitimate options, I mean, that becomes intriguing. There becomes a point where, hey, does this guy have the capability of giving me 20 DraftKings points? If so, 4,600 is a great spot. It really, really opens things up for you. Pair him up with Golladay, you're in a good spot. I just am not sure of the upside. I think, Dallas comes in there and potentially stomps him. I think because he looked good last week, he's going to kind of, run into a little bit of not so good fortune against this Dallas defense this week, but we'll see.
Can you see Jameis coming in under-owned in this high total matchup just because people hate Jameis?
I mean, he's going to come in under-owned regardless. I think that's just because, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo against Arizona, Derek Carr against Cincinnati, Drew Brees, people are going to want to play. People are going to want to play Lamar Jackson and Kyle Allen. There's so many options. He's, just by default is going to come in around 5%. It's possible. It's possible we're in a good spot here. But what scares me, man, is those interceptions. He's, almost guaranteed to throw at least one pick. He's also probably due for one of those down games. Like he's just been so decent and dropping 20 plus DraftKings points each of the last 4 weeks. And so, it could be a disappointment spot. So myself, I might be actually fading James Winston.
So I like the turnovers from Jameis. I always think that's the best thing that he does because he just puts himself into garbage time. The other team drops into prevent. He just starts piling up all the yardage. It's difficult to run on New Orleans. Tampa Bay can't run anyway, although they try to all the time. But I just feel like this is a spot where people will use Breeze, but they might even use Evans. They might even use Godwin or go back to O.J. Howard, but Jameis will not be the guy they go to. I can see myself with some Jameis. Josh Allen is intriguing because of the rushing touchdowns. I prefer him to like a Jimmy Garoppolo, but I think it might be Brady. Brady at $6,400. You could pair him with Sanu if you wanted to. You could pair him with Edelman, or just play Brady and hope it's one of those games where, Brandon Bolden has a receiving touchdown. Izzo has a receiving touchdown. And you get all the goods of Brady against a really terrible pass defense.
And you get a touchdown, and you get a touchdown. Yeah, it's absolutely potentially one of these type of scenarios. Brady definitely pops up on the list. He's in my article this week. It just feels like the week for him. It's going to be a close matchup. I understand New England's coming off a bye, but I just don't see a lot of rushing touchdowns in this game, and I see absolutely at least 250 passing yards and 3 touchdowns through the air for Tom Brady this week.
The other one, I mentioned Driscoll. If we're going to play crappy quarterbacks, Oakland has like the 30th ranked pass defense. Ryan Finley's not good, but he's another guy who's just going to run the ball. And if we expressed some love for Tyler Boyd and Auden Tate, why not Finley?
Yeah, he's actually a preferred option for me, from Driscoll. And I understand he's a little bit more expensive, but it's just the way that this game flows out to be. It actually flows out perfectly for him. I think he's an absolute, obvious GPP option. Maybe not on your primary team, but if you think about it, Oakland at home, run Josh Jacobs down their throats, being able to do whatever they want to him, and then Finley having to just pass to Mix and pass to Boyd, air it out to Auden Tate. You're going to see a lot of this type of a lot of stuff like this. And so it's a potential 300 plus yards. You get the bonus, get a couple of passing touchdowns, and get that whole fourth quarter of garbage time. So I'm on board for some Finley this week.
All right, let's switch to tight end. And is this going to be a week where you think you pay up? Because there's not a whole lot of options. You have Kittle at the very top. He's 7,000, but he might not play. Austin Hooper is 5,600. He's not going to play. So you have Mark Andrews. He's 6,100. Then you have Darren Waller, who's 55. And then Ertz against the Patriots at 5,000. Andrews is my preferred guy, but 6,100 is just a lot to pay up in a week where there is a lot of expensive options at other positions.
Yeah, it feels to me like the better spot, at least for Baltimore, is going to be with the perimeter options, guys like Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown, maybe even some Miles Boykin this week. I mean, obviously Andrews is his main target. He's his safety valve, and so it just comes down to price this week. Like Kittle isn't 100%. I understand he gets to Arizona. But at 7,000, it really kind of hamstrings you from being able to have roster flexibility elsewhere. And that's the same thing with Mark Andrews. So I think just by that, you're going to see a lot of people on Darren Waller at 5,500. And then possibly some folks on Jared Cook as well, 4,400, coming off the game with 4 catches. It could be interesting. Tampa Bay gives up the most amount of fantasy points to tight ends. So I think you might see some people go in that direction.
Yeah, but Jared Cook sucks, so you don't want to do that.
Yes, it's very possible.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a good spot. That means he scores 0 points. That's how Jared Cook rolls. So Mark Andrews from the top for me. Jack Doyle is now priced up a bit at 4,000. So I think that Noah Fant at $3,700 and Eric Ebron at $3,600. Now this is with no T.Y. Hilton around. We already know that Paris Campbell is going to miss time. But, I mean, Ebron was this close to a really huge game last week, but he didn't get it. Now people aren't going to use him, but it's still a really nice opportunity against the Jags.
Yeah, I mean, people are dropping Eric Ebron in my high-stakes leagues. I'm about to go pick him up. I understand the guy's playing 2% of snaps or so it seems. And he did have double-digit touchdowns last year, led all tight ends, in that category. But yeah, I mean, it does feel like a week where you can get Eric Ebron in the mix. So I think that is in play. Noah Fant, of course, because Denver just doesn't have a lot of guys to pass to. I've got a sneaky one for you. This guy hasn't been really on the radar since week 1. TJ Hawkinson. Dallas is that's their one weakness is against tight ends. They're giving up the second most amount of fantasy points, DraftKings points to tight ends. I think the way the game script works out is that you see Hawkinson in the mix a little bit. So that's my little sneaky addition of the week in the tight end spot.
TJ Hawkinson is, amongst tight ends, one of the leaders in end zone targets so far this year. He just happens to drop most of them or suffer a concussion halfway through the game. But I think a 2-touchdown game is definitely in the cards. I mean, you just pair him up with Driscoll, you'll be good to go.
That's it. Take all the money.
So the other guys, if Kittle sits and you have Ross Dwelly at $3,400, I just think he'll morph into a really popular option solely because he's playing the Cardinals.
It's absolutely possible. I mean, we saw it last week in the absence of Kittle. The guy saw 7 targets. He did not do much with them. But yeah, I mean, it could just be, a nice spot. I mean, anytime you've got Arizona on the board, I mean, listen, it brought OJ Howard back to life, right? So anything is possible. Ross Dwelly is in play. And I mean, what about Tyler Eifert, 3,200?
No, absolutely not.
I was going to say, you may not invite me back on the show after this, but Oakland, I don't know.
No, can't do that. I'd rather use Ryan Griffin at $2,900 now that Herndon's on IR.
Fair.
And I can't think of anyone below that. So, and I don't even know if I want to get down to 2,900 to use Ryan Griffin. I think I'm pretty good with. I'll kind of assess Dwelly as the week goes along and see where the sentiment is on him. If you want to use fansharesports.com to track a lot of these ownerships in the sentiment rankings, if you use the code PME, you get yourself a discount and you can follow along all week. I'll have the ownership report on Friday's show as well. But Eric Ebron, $3,600. It feels that's low enough. 3,600 is fine, right?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you're not going to see a lower price on him all year. And with no T.Y. Hilton, it kind of just makes things, even more intriguing. It's been Jack Doyle week last couple of weeks. It's time for some Ebron. Time to switch things up.
Yeah, even last week with no Campbell and no Hilton and Brian Hoyer under center, Ebron played 61% of the snaps, Jack Doyle 60%, and Mo Alley-Cox only played 31%. So he's going to be on the field more than half the time. We know that he's always on the field in the red zone. Big fan of running short of the first down sticks as well. So maybe he can get 2 catches instead of 1 because he doesn't know where the first down marker is. Who knows? But if he can get one of those touchdowns, and I think a lot of people will be off of him and onto Jack Doyle. So let's wrap this up. Let's talk about some defenses. Who sticks out to you right away? I don't really ever care about defensive price. Just who are the ones who are going to generate the most pressure on the opposing quarterback and just kind of go for it here? Who do you like?
I think at the top, you're going to see a lot of people, if they can, pay up for the Niners, pay up for the Bills in the matchup in Miami. I kind of like some options in the mid-range. I think, the Minnesota Vikings at home against Denver, Brandon Allen just making his 3rd career start. I think they're a very good option. And I think the Raiders are really underrated. I think, them at home have an opportunity to keep these Bengals below 10 points. I mean, this team is just kind of humming on all levels. I think, they deserve some love. But where most people are going to go is probably Carolina or Baltimore at home. 3,000 for both places. That Baltimore is going to generate a lot of pressure, probably sack Watson a couple of times, though the game does have a high total, so you may not see a lot of people there. But I think those are 2 teams that people might be using this week.
So the ones that I'm kind of gravitating towards here, I kind of like the Redskins at $2,800. Still, the one thing they can do is generate pressure on the quarterback, and the Jets have the worst offensive line in football.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game that you're going to see ownership on Washington. You'll see some ownership on the Jets as well on their defense because it's like a 37.5 total. There's going to be, some sloppy play from these quarterbacks. There are going to be some turnovers. Washington's defensive line has enough, a little bit of umph there to make it rain just a little bit, maybe get lucky and run into, a pick 6. So we'll see, I'm kind of erring on the side of, I'm hoping this game shoots out because I want to play some of these in a game stack as low owned, but definitely not opposed to using the defense there at that price.
The only one I was also considering, and this might be a bad situation because Minnesota might run the entire time if I was going super cheap, Broncos D has been getting better every single week, and they're starting to generate pressure again. And we know that their pass defense is really good. It's just, can they keep up on the scoreboard to make Minnesota pass 30 times in this game? I'm not sure they can do that.
Yeah, I don't think that's at least the way I see it this week. I don't see that being a very likely scenario. I understand the price point is really tempting at 2,400, but for the most part, I'm just seeing this as a situation where hey, unless Elway comes in there himself and is going to be the quarterback, I don't really see any way that they keep up with Minnesota on the road.
So the ones for me, I guess I like the Saints at $2,900. I'm just kind of stunned that they're as cheap as they are. Great pressure. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Cam Jordan, but if they can get their full complement back, Tampa Bay's offensive line is not very good. We know that Jameis turns the ball over at will, and they've given up 34 sacks so far this season. So the worst teams on this slate at giving up sacks, the Jets, the Dolphins, the Cardinals, the Bucks, the Bengals, and the Vikings. Also Carolina into that mix too. I'm kind of surprised to see them so far down. So I guess the Saints would be my preferred play, and I think that they're the best option for their price point.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to see them under 3,000. Even if the Bucks put up a little bit of some points, that New Orleans is going to get theirs as well. I'd like to see a healthy Lattimore in the mix, but you're going to see them pretty popular, probably top 4 owned on the weekend.
All right. Vlad, thank you for being on the show today. You can follow Vlad on Twitter at RotoGut and tell everyone where they can check out all your work.
That's where I'm at on Twitter. And for Elite Fantasy, for the DFS stuff, is the spot, elitefantasy.com, and on the season long, fantasyguru.com. Thank you so much, Pat, for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right, you can follow me at the PME on Instagram, Twitter, and the Facebooks. You can find my DK cheat sheet out on Saturday morning or Friday evening, depending on if I go drinking or not. But you can find that on DKPlaybook.com. I wait until then before I get the ownerships and make some finalized decisions on that as well. If you have questions about DraftKings, tune into the Sunday morning show, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Besides that, playing the Pat Mayo Experience Open, enter all the draws, and watch all of the shows during the week, all right? I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!